Okay, welcome everyone. Greetings from Fordham and the Institute on Religion, Law, and Lawyers Work. Thank you for joining us at another event of our book club series. And today we will have a conversation on Massimo Borghese's newly translated Catholic Discordance, New Conservatism versus the Field Hospital Church of Pope Francis. My name is Andy Moraes. I'm the director of Fordham Law School, Institute on Religion, Law, and Lawyers Work. And I am honored to be introducing our moderator for this event, George Conk, Professor Conk, who is the son of a Fordham alum, came to Fordham in 2002, 27 years after being a trial and appellate lawyer in New Jersey. Born in Brooklyn, George graduated from Brooklyn Prep, then Holy Cross College, where he was the chairman of the Christian Encounter with the Modern World Lecture Series. And that is an important event to mention because it was the seed that led George today to be the co-creator of this book club series. Currently, George serves as the senior fellow of the Stein Center for Law and Ethics. But before I pass the mic to George, let me remind our audience that if you want to check our previous conversations in this book club, we discussed already two books, Kathleen Cavani's Ethics at the Edges of Law and Massimo Faggioli's By Them in U.S. Catholicism. So visit the Institute's website where you can have access to our previous events. I also want to register special thanks to Liturgical Press for providing our audience access to excerpts of the book, and particularly thanks to Barry Hudak for an excellent translation that allow us to have this conversation on Borghese's work. Finally, a special thanks also to our panelists that George will introduce shortly. So George, take it away.
Okay. Well, let's start with Massimo Faggioli, whose book was the topic of our most recent topic. And Massimo Faggioli is a professor of theology and theological history at Villanova, which will get a lot of television time due to basketball this week. But Massimo Faggioli, since he came here from Italy, has become a very welcome and popular voice in the progressive Catholic press. And I've particularly seen him really deeply praised by Michael Sean Winters, the columnist at National Catholic Reporter, of which I'm a long subscriber. And also he writes regularly for Commonweal, which has been an important voice to me since I think I first started reading Commonweal in around 1964. So he's a welcome addition to our dialogues. Thomas Massaro, a Jesuit and professor of moral theology here at Fordham, and has participated with us before, including our discussion of Kathleen Cavani's Ethics at the Edges of Law, in which we did 3 sessions in regarding a very challenging book by a theologian and law professor at Boston College. And Michael Baur is a philosopher and lawyer who teaches at Fordham and teaches, among other things, about natural law. One of our offerings at the law school. And so he has been an anchor at Fordham to help us maintain vital discussions on the kinds of issues that bring us here today. So just to start off, Massimo Borghesi's book focuses on the question of the Catholic ethic of social justice, which goes back, I would say, to Pope Leo XIII in 1891 in his letter, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working classes, and but has remained vital. And so we see its vitality in recent years. For example, John Paul II in 1991, who emphasized in his encyclical Centesimus Annus that economic freedom is only one element of human freedom, that and he warned of the risks of idolatry of the market. Benedict XVI, who we see as a doctrinal conservative, nonetheless also embraced the church's social doctrine, putting charity at the heart of it in his 2009 encyclical Caritas in Veritate. And that theme is continued by Pope Francis in his 2020 encyclical Fratelli Tutti, where he says the development of a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship on the part of peoples and nations is our objective. And here at a time of war in Europe, that's particularly on everyone's mind. So, Professor Faggioli, when John Paul said that he warned of these mechanisms that carry the risk of an idolatry of the market, despite that, the objects of Borghesi's criticism, neoconservatives, saw him as having given a ringing endorsement of the market economy. So, who is Massimo Borghesi, and who are the neoconservatives that he's criticizing?
So, thank you for organizing this, and also let me thank Hans Christoffersen here, the publisher of Liturgical Press, who once again has given US Catholics and US public a very important work to understand Pope Francis, the Church of today, and the other states of today. This is really a great gift that he and they have given to us. So here, Massimo Borghesi is a very interesting lay Catholic intellectual who is key to understand Pope Francis and where Pope Francis comes from, because Borghesi has never belonged to Catholic liberalism or progressivism. He is one of those that in the 1970s in Italy were called extreme centrists. So those who held very strongly dear the idea that the church and the Catholic social doctrine are at the center of the moral universe, not just of Italy or of the West or Europe, but of our common humanity living together. And so this says a lot about Pope Francis, his background. He says also something on the products that a certain neoconservative turn within Catholic intelligentsia of the center has produced in the 90s. And here, I mean, going to your question, what this book talks about connects very clearly, even if indirectly, with what's happening in Ukraine. Why? because the historical turn Borghese talks about happens between the late 80s and early 90s, that macro historical rupture, which happens with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and in 91, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which is something that on which a certain kind of a Catholic culture, like John Paul II, was aware that was going to have massive consequences. And so this book it's very important. Why? For many reasons, but also because it shows that there has been, especially since the early 90s, and especially with the encyclical of 91, a particularly peculiar and, in my opinion, distorted reception of John Paul II in the United States. As a pope who was fundamentally cheering on the collapse of communism and saying, we won. We Catholics, we are finally the herald of a new era where democracy will be wedded to capitalism and so on. This is important because this is not how John Paul II's interpretation of the fall of communism was interpreted in Europe. I remember that because I was studying these things, and I remember also progressive intellectuals, non-Catholics, saying John Paul II is giving here to Marx and those ideals some kind of the honors after the enemy is fallen. And so there was some ethical instance that in the 1991 encyclical John Paul II was acknowledging, which was missing, I think, in the Catholic American interpretation of that. And so this book is, among many other reasons, important for this because there is in modern papal teaching on social issues, economic issues, there has been, especially in these last 40, 50, 60 years, a real divergence according to the background positions of Catholics reading one same encyclical. It begins especially with Pacem in Terris, 1963, and it continues until today. But the 90s, I believe, are a key juncture because 91 is a macro rupture. And what happens then, we are still paying the prices of those missed signals in the economic system, in geopolitics, and so on.
You mentioned Pacem in Terris, so being the age that I am, I remember when that came out, and that was 1963, and we were soon confronted with the escalation of the war in Vietnam and the rise of the Catholic peace movement, and the U.S. Catholic bishops responded in important ways during the early 1980s when there were increase in threats of nuclear armaments with what were called medium-range missiles in Europe. But it's surprising to me that when I read in Borghese that Michael Novak, who was once a progressive and later became a conservative, and Richard Newhouse and others with them asserted that John Paul was celebrating the free market, which, having reviewed his encyclical Centesimus Annus in preparation for today, is an implausible reading. But Borghese asserts that the U.S. Catholic bishops have many of them quite warmly embraced that message. What's your sense of the reaction of the U.S. Church to this celebration of free market capitalism that Novak and Newhouse and others put forth?
I think Father Massaro knows much more about this than I am, but I mean, briefly, that was a church that was still a church of the 1986 letter of the US bishops on social economic justice. And so that there was still that wave of an episcopate that was still receiving Vatican II. In the 90s begins the rupture in the tradition and transmission of Vatican II that we are still paying right now. So this is what I would say, but I think Father Thomas and
so Father Massaro, what's your sense about the impact of that sort of thinking in the U.S. Church?
Sure. There's nothing new about many voices trying to steal Catholic social teaching to match their preconceived notions of what the economy is, what it should be, and you're correct to frame it the way you have framed it. Those three voices, two of them now deceased, of Richard John Newhouse, Michael Novak, and George Weigel, the living one of the three, have been documented, studied. Remember that Weigel had the famous interpretation of Centesimus, of Caritas in Veritate, that there are parts that are authentically Benedict's views. Those are the gold. He describes them as written in gold leaf. And then the red ones that were, I don't know, somehow foisted upon Benedict. He signed the document, but those were voices from some radical communists in his Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace. I've been teaching all of these documents, and especially you mentioned Centesimus Annus from 1991, mostly on the graduate level, since about the time Centesimus Annus came out 31 years ago now, hard to believe. And I simply will just reaffirm what George, you said, and what Massimo said. They are contested terrain. There's a lot to fight over. I think that the condemnations of excessive capitalist practices, you know, the laissez-faire market that makes no allowance for a regulated economy. Remember John Paul II's great phrases, it needs to be circumcised by a juridical framework that protects the poor and ensures the common good and other social goods. Of course, that gets overlooked by some. And let me just finish by saying, in The Joy of the Gospel, Evangelii Gaudium, the first major teaching document, November of 2013 from Francis, we have a reiteration of those kind of warnings about the excesses of capitalism. I don't know how anybody could miss it, but they somehow do. You know, when money becomes your idol, such an economy kills. He's talking about an economy in paragraph 52 of Evangelii Gaudium. Francis is talking about an economy that makes no allowance for the needs of the poor, the excluded, the oppressed, through structural defects in the capitalist system. So there's not a lot of ambiguity, and yet people do find a way to miss that message. And I will close with this, that I don't think there's any danger to respond to George's opening phrase there. The Catholic ethic of social justice is secure. It's really the main line of our tradition now, at least for the past 70 years, probably 130 years since Rerum Novarum came out in 1891. But at the same time, sure, that selective reading of the tradition, it never surprises me to see that. I see it in my students. I see it in smart authors. I have a couple of pet theories as to why some really smart people nonetheless miss this. I'll talk about those later. But I feel secure that this is the main line of our tradition now, but it doesn't mean that the battles to defend it are over. We have to keep defending it.
But what about the degree of attention that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has given to the social justice gospel? Do you feel that there's been an impact of the neoconservatives that has diminished that?
The shortest of all answers is only around the edges. I really don't see our bishops as backing away in a full-throated way from the main thrust of concern for the poor. Even the documents that I received somewhat half-heartedly from our bishops, like the Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, it needs to be rewritten to account for new things, including Pope Francis. It barely, even the revised version from 2019, it just has a token, a gesture towards Pope Francis's social ethics. But even those, they're pro-poor documents. It may get lost in the shuffle, but I haven't seen any rupture there.
So in the headlines recently, there's a lot of discussion about Vatican II, and it suddenly appears to be controversial. So, Father, what would you say about the U.S. Church's embrace of Vatican II, and what drove Pope Francis to limit the use of the Latin Mass, when, after all, hasn't the new liturgy been pretty firmly embedded?
Yeah, it's some of these things mystify me. I'll never quite figure out why things go the way that they do, and why are these debates still going on? And by the way, let me just commend, since we have a couple of people who've written in Commonweal on this panel, the current issue of Commonweal, it's the March issue, has a wonderful article by Sean Blanchard. I did not know him previously. It was called "The Reform is Real." I think he's a Newman scholar out of Pittsburgh, and it does talk very articulately and very insightfully about all of those terms that we need to keep recalling, the precise meaning of reform, of change and continuity, how we reformulate doctrine without necessarily overturning it or repudiating it. So again, I'll recommend the March 2022 issue of Commonweal for that article. And by the way, known to all of us on this panel, Austin Ivory has a very good piece on the liturgical aspects of the recent debates. It's an exchange of opinions that Austin Ivory has with a commentator that I did not know previously, named Gregory Hillis, who's at Louisville, Kentucky, the Bellarmine University there. So that article covers the ground that I think George was hinting at. It's called "Has the Pope Been Too Hard on Traditionalists?" And by the way, there are ways in which I'll buy that argument, because his emphasis on mercy and dialogue, I think you could reasonably argue, hasn't been consistently applied to the back and forth on the Tridentine liturgy and those who want to practice it. So yeah, these are live issues. I always urge a rigorous use of terminology like reform, change, continuity, and change in the church, and going back to Newman and to wonderful people like John Noonan, whose last great book was the Church That Can and Cannot Change. We need to keep reviewing these issues and keeping them alive.
So I'm gonna pose a kind of a next issue and ask first response from Massimo Faggioli, and then Michael Baur and Father Massaro, which is when I look back to my own experience of the era of Vatican II, the thing that was exciting about it as a young man was the call to engage in dialogue, and that's why I offered to Andy Marias the introduction that I chaired a lecture series in college called Christian Encounter with the Modern World, which was not my idea, right? That was the idea of the leadership of the college who financed it and proposed this project. And now the analog seems that I would suggest is possible is the Pope's call for synodality. So let me start with Massimo Faggioli. What's that call about, and what has been the reaction on Catholic campuses? And I know from having read your article in Commonweal that that's an area that you've been concerned about.
So synodality is a word that per se does not exist in the corpus of Vatican II. It was never talked about because Vatican II gets close to this idea of a church that was looking for a less monarchical way of governing itself by talking about episcopal collegiality, meaning bishops together with the Pope. But any talk at Vatican II of collegiality, for example, between bishops and their own priests was immediately shut down by priests, because because bishops had no intention to sharing their power with them. So it's a new concept in the word that, I mean, theologians start talking about in the late 80s, early 90s, largely because of the ecumenical context with the East. And so for 30 years, popes have ignored this new ecclesiological development. And then comes Francis, who, because he's a Jesuit and because of his Latin American, is more sensitive to this issue of the church as a people. So his synodality, as I said, it doesn't exist in the corpus of the Second Vatican Council, but the intuition is there. The intuition is there that, so there's the idea that there's only one baptism, so all Catholics are fundamentally equal in their dignity. So that's and so here Pope Francis has started this slowly with a new way of running the Bishop Synod of 2014-2015, really with a new style, new way, and then he launched this idea for a synodal process globally, which is supposed to have to happen between the end of 2021 and October 2023. And so this is being lived, is being organized in very different ways in different countries, but also within one same country. Like the US, there are dioceses where you really hear and feel that there's something going on, and in other places, still not there. On Catholic colleges, university campuses, there's something moving. It is happening, I would say, late, but there's still time. And also because, and let's remember that the synodal process is something that calendar-wise ends in October 2023. But this belongs to the long-term trajectories of the Catholic Church, because it's simply unimaginable that the Church could go back to a style of governance that is episcopalist, is clericalist. It is simply not in the numbers of the clergy. So here there has been an effort lately by the Bishop Synod in Rome and by the USCCB and the ACCU to help this happening. And I've seen different styles or different modalities. It is fundamentally this, that the students and faculty should get the idea that with Pope Francis, something has changed and something is changing. I'm always shocked because many of my students, when we talk in class, for example, about the church and LGBT people, they are convinced that what Pope Francis has said on the need for the church to change its approach to LGBT people is Pope Francis' personal opinion. And that has changed nothing in the ways of the church. So his synodality is one way to convey many other things. So we want you to speak. We, church, we want to listen to you. It should not be scripted. It should not be too much according to a ritual, but it's about helping people understand, realize that there's something important going on, and all are called to be part of it.
So, Father Massaro and Michael, my basic question is, what meaning can this have for us at Fordham? I don't know who framed it, but someone way above me on the scale said that the Catholic approach is Scripture, the experience of the faithful, and the teaching of the magisterium. And so this synodality approach seems to be an effort to enhance the experience, the voice of the faithful in a new way. What do you think that we can do at Fordham in this regard?
How about Michael, Professor Baur, go first on this?
Sure.
So sometimes attorneys who are asked their opinion preface what they're going to say by saying, well, I'm just a country lawyer. I'm just a suburban metaphysician. That's my line. So here I am in New Jersey. I teach at Fordham. I commute into the city. Here's my view. This move towards synodality, a kind of collegiality, really is continuous with the kind of move that the times require. Professor Faggioli mentioned earlier in his observations that there really was a missed opportunity in the 1990s. We're still paying the price for the missed signals that were being given by those who had the authority to speak. Their voices were translated into a kind of neoconservative rhetoric about the winning, a triumphal winning of capitalism over communism. My view to expand that would be we're still paying the price for having missed the signals that were on the table in many ways, going back to the time of even Ignatius. And one could even bring Nietzsche and Heidegger into the picture, that modernity is an opportunity, but it's a very dangerous opportunity as well. So what I find or found very, very suggestive in Borghesi's book was this idea that the complaints about secularization that the neocons have made really is a complaint that could be made equally about their own rhetoric and their own attempt to reinterpret documents and doctrines of the church. Secularization is a problem. It's always a temptation, though, to interpret ourselves out of the existing institutions that we ourselves have fabricated. So the neoconservatives do that, the liberals do it, and I point to Ignatius as a model here, and here's why. He is equally working in on shifting ground. He's emerging out of a medieval mindset, trying to make sense of the growing incipient modernity that he is seeing around him. Humanism, Renaissance thinking, moving beyond a monastic model to a radically non-monastic model. Nadal says, where is our home? It's everywhere. So we sort of build as we go along. Or to be philosophical about it, Otto Neurath has this wonderful image of being on a raft that you have to build as you're using it. And so the move from the monastic to the non-monastic self-understanding, I think is what we as Catholics and as members of the Fordham community or other larger intellectual communities have to approach. And there's always the danger that you interpret yourself out of the structures that you've built, and then you become caught into this self-fulfilling, self-congratulatory system. I think Ignatius was very worried. There's a good reason why the Jesuits' early involvement in universities was both an opportunity and a danger, because once you start putting your stakes down in a particular place and are committed to schools, you end up being invested in the things that you've created rather than the movement. So, zooming out a little bit, I would say that the danger of modernity, that again, modernity, enlightenment is opportunity, but also a danger. And I think Ignatius suggested ways, and that's why Francis is so interesting, because he really is deeply an Ignatian thinker, that we have to see ourselves as pilgrims on the move, even though we set up institutions that tend to cause us not to be so open to movement. So we need to move from a foundationalist way of understanding ourselves to a more hermeneutical way of understanding ourselves, that we interpret ourselves as we move along and we build as we go along. And Newman says the same thing, that the orderings and systems and institutions that are to emerge become richer and cannot be predicted in advance. So I think there's a deep
hospital church.
Yes, that's right. You build the church, you build the hospital on the fly. Now, obviously, there's the worry about relativism. That's always there. And I think the way to address that problem is not to become more foundationalist and more dogmatic, but it's to engage in a sort of process of dialogue.
Well, let me ask you about our process. When I came to Fordham in 2002, a couple of years after I came, Andy Mariah's predecessor, Amy Ullman, who's now at Georgetown, organized at the request actually of Father McShane and Dean Traynor, a faculty discussion group. And we had a faculty discussion group for quite a few years, with the very active participation of Russell Pierce, the director of the Institute, and also Ian Weinstein, neither of whom was a Catholic, but both of whom were very drawn to the Focolare movement, which Amy and Andy are associated with. But we didn't reach out beyond faculty. So we were kind of in a clericalist model, it was enough that we professors were sharing what our mission was. What possibilities, if any, do you think that we have to broaden the dialogue to include the students at both the law school and elsewhere in the university?
And one can take that insight and go further with it, broaden the dialogue to include the students, broaden the dialogue to include those who are not officially members of the university, but more members of the community that surround the university, custodial staff that live in the neighborhoods, but work at the university. So I think the first step is, maybe Newman is going to be useful here. He has his work on the idea of a university, very, very famous, and many people often interpret that as an endorsement of university structures that make possible dialogue. But there's a real, one might say, a Nietzschean Marxian skepticism that comes out in Newman regarding institutions. Institutions do have a way of undermining the living mission that they're meant to serve. So what you do, Newman says, I would rather be in a group of individuals with no structure rather than who simply debate and dialogue, rather than be part of a structure where the structure destroys the dialogue. So I think the first step is to realize institutions, as necessary as they are, do have a way of, like bureaucracies, aggrandizing themselves and undermining the living purpose for which they exist.
So, Father Massaro, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the I guess the first step is to exercise a little bit of self-doubt and skepticism about the institutions that indeed make possible what we do, but we have to be skeptical about them as well, because they often do channel us. So just one last word on this. The institution of the university, but I see this also even at the high school level, has become an instrument of capitalism. Faculty members more and more are free agents who bounce around from one team to another because the salary and the credentials attract them. The team is not first. The free agency is often first, and that's a problem, and I don't know what the solution is.
So
As ever,
Massaro, the popes talked about clericalism. Are we guilty of it?
well, you could interpret everything. First of all, I always agree with everything that my suburban metaphysician friend Michael Baur says. And I want to pick up more actually on what he said about Ignatius. Absolutely true. Everything he said there was true, and maybe Ignatius was wise to be slow to move into education, but he did eventually. But that wasn't his original intention for the New Society of Jesus, to establish big educational institutions for all the reasons Michael just said. But something else he said, I just want to amplify. As far as the synodal process goes, the underlying assumption of any genuine, sincere, authentic synodal process is that the Holy Spirit is speaking through somebody besides the guys wearing the funny bishop's hats, right? Or the Pope's hat even. So that, I trace that back to Ignatius. And by the way, he was brought in front of a little Inquisition rump court once or twice, because it sounded like he was, making the Holy Spirit a little bit too democratic or diffused. But that's the way Society of Jesus has its internal polity. Every member of the Society of Jesus, subjects like myself, we are asked to speak, to represent our opinions, what we call an account of conscience, every year to our superiors. And the assumption written into our constitutions and the spiritual exercises is that the Holy Spirit speaks through the voice of everyone. So put that, put aside Jesuit governance, put that into a synodal process like Pope Francis just started. The assumption is, and it's threatening to many, is it not, that the Holy Spirit speaks authentically through all the members of the faithful, sure, by virtue of their baptism. These days, it's by virtue of their excellent education. Wasn't always the case that all Catholics were, even literate, much less more highly educated than most of their bishops and other leaders, if you count degrees and things like that. So I think that's a radical change. I agree that, as Michael Baur wisely said, this does raise up some dangers of relativism, some fears of bottom-up consultation that does threaten the status quo of a hierarchical church. But nonetheless, we need to avoid the clericalism that George just mentioned and Michael had mentioned as well. This is a movement for the good. And my only kind of prediction is how hard this is for American Catholics. We're used to saying we're going to be democratic in the political sphere. We expect to vote and to have a say, a free speech in the political sphere. We don't really expect, we're not in the habit of thinking of ourselves as equal, democratic participants in the religious sphere. So we tend to be passive, we tend to be apathetic, and we tend to leave it to the bishops to settle these things. So that's a change of mindset that needs to happen before the synodal process will be truly meaningful.
So Borghese quotes Francis when he was Cardinal Bergoglio as saying, we're no longer living in Christendom. We must demonstrate openness, esteem, and acceptance of others. So at Fordham, how can we do that to expand our dialogue as broad as Michael just mentioned, to include even the staff? I mean, what do we do really from day to day, more than say a polite hello, good afternoon, to those who serve us, right? what do you think we can do at Fordham to make this process something valuable? You want to take a stab at that?
I would offer maybe this, beginning with this note of skepticism or self-doubt about the institution that makes possible what we do, because the institution also does channel us in certain ways that then cut out questions that we're willing to ask ourselves. Looking ahead to the future, the university is itself, by university, I mean, the university system in the United States in general, is under suspicion as well. So there's a certain kind of populist movement that's making the university system defensive. And of course, what happens is that defensiveness then translates into universities responding with flyers and advertisements. My son, who's in high school, is receiving all sorts of these announcements and advertisements now, and it's nothing but marketing, because these colleges need to get the funds to come in. What happens now is we have a system in which money, capitalism, advertising, business, return on investment is the currency of the rhetoric. I think what's going to happen sooner or later is, as long as universities keep engaging and accepting that rhetoric, they're going to make themselves not good investments, because mom and dad are going to say, why am I spending this money at a university which is supposed to give my kid a job when the kid can get a job more cheaply doing something else? So I think we have to rethink the rhetoric by means of which universities represent themselves. And that might mean, as it always does, I think, when we radically change things, is giving up some of the cherished doctrines and orthodoxies that we subscribe to. So I'm not saying that we should do this. My colleagues would maybe hate me if I advocate for it, but the tenure system is itself a institutionalized protection against certain kinds of questions. Now, tenure does protect academic freedom in many ways, but it also makes a lot of people comfortable. So things like this systematic protections for people maybe should be re-questioned. We need to give up more in order to get the process moving, I think, more in a positive direction. I do think the rhetoric of the market has infiltrated the university so deeply. And as a result, just like the rhetoric of legality infiltrated the church during the sexual abuse crisis. That prevented a lot of honest reckoning. So we need to start giving up the memes and the rhetoric within which we're living, whether within the church as an institution, or whether it's the university as an institution.
When we look at what motivates our students, people like John Furyk and our clinical programs are very engaged in service. Do you think that there's a way that we can connect that to the Jesuit mission of the law school? We have this interesting opportunity. For the first time, we will not have a Jesuit priest as the president of the university, but through some grace, we're going to have a president who's the daughter of a Jesuit, and surely appreciates that. I wonder if we have an opportunity. So I'll ask Father Massaro to build on that with this new leadership at the university.
George, I would just say, so as not to scandalize people, you mean the daughter of someone who had been a Jesuit?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'll just chime in briefly. I think that the selection of Dr. Tanya Tetlow was brilliant. She's going to be a great leader. I had a chance to meet her briefly. So it's really all about the mission. And Michael Baur had some very apt comments, challenges about our mission, what might stand in the way. I want Fordham to continue to be a distinctive university. It's not Harvard as far as quality of academic excellence and resources, but we are what we are. We have 170, 180-year tradition of living that mission very well. And I see it going forward into the future with great promise. And of course, all of the challenges that Michael Baur just said are true. Is it too corporate? Do our students, actually, I think one of the strengths of our university is our students' sense of idealism. I suspect that's as true in Fordham Law School as it is with the undergraduates that I teach. They gobble up Catholic social teaching, my major topic, and peace, my other major topic, because they are idealistic about these principles, and they want to live them out, and they want to learn how to live them out maybe better than our generation. So I'm optimistic. As long as we stay with our mission, we're not ashamed of our mission, we continue to select leadership, whether it's people wearing a collar like me or not, who are mission-driven and know that who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and how we can do it even better. It's the magis, always seeking better.
So we've touched on the long history of the Catholic social justice mission, but more concretely, we've seen progress in some ways, but slow on others. Like we've seen the teaching on capital punishment change, and now it's fundamentally impermissible in the catechism. But we've not seen progress on women, for example, even female deacons, and we've certainly not seen progress on married priesthood, which honestly mystifies me, because we have in the Byzantine rite married priests, and we've welcomed Anglican priests who are already married, and the Orthodox tradition, of course, has a married priesthood. But so, Massimo Faggioli, do you think that those topics, that there's room for raising them in this synodal process that the Pope has initiated?
Well, certainly they have been raised, and with a very loud voice, in Germany by the German Synod, which is the most progressive phase of the synodal process right now, very organized, very structured, very strategic. So we have seen that happening in a formal way, something that many Catholics are talking about or are expecting, and for quite some time now in other countries, though. Now here, I believe, and I wrote about this a long article in La Croix International in March 2020, that this is not a contradiction in Francis. This is the same Francis. It's the same Francis. So here Francis is fundamentally a centrist Catholic who has been embraced by liberal, progressive Catholics in the United States, because he has unmasked the ideology of neoconservatives in this country. But Pope Francis is not a progressive Catholic, is not a liberal Catholic, he's a Vatican II centrist. So here, I don't know what he will make of what has come from Germany, what might come from Australia, in other places on women deacons and so on. I mean, things, by the way, that would not require fundamental ruptures in magisterium, because there is no teaching of the church that prohibits the ordination of women deacons. There's no obstacle whatsoever.
None at all, right?
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think that Francis at this moment has interest for that. Now, there's one more thing here. What we have seen in these last few years and in these last few months and weeks in the international situation means also that for some, the role to which the church is called right now in its unity makes the theological and disciplinary steps forward on women deacons and so on less likely to happen. Because the argument that some might use is we cannot afford to be divided, to look divided as a Catholic Church in this moment when we have to be united and basically show that it is possible to be a church in favor of peace, not nationally divided, and so on. And so here, I believe that the theological work must continue on women deacons, women in the church, all of that. From a pragmatic point of view, I don't know what is going to happen in this synodal process, because it would require a change in the mind of Francis on some issues. And this is going to be critical, because I don't think, honestly, that the church in Germany has much of a future without making some changes on those issues. I really don't think that church can survive and be what it has been and what it needs to be for Germany and for Europe and for the world, ignoring completely what the synodal process in Germany has proposed.
So, Father Massaro, do you think that we face similar obstacles as the German progressives face here? Like, it's, it strikes me that we've had a full generation of the sexual abuse crisis. And of course, we know that it turns out to be a problem that goes far beyond the church. But just the cultural sense among our student body is mystified by statements such as in the Catechism that homosexuality is a disorder. Like, how can we confront these issues and make the dialogue in the church something that draws in our students?
Yeah. Oh, very good. And those very topics have been surfacing in a batch of 35 student papers that I've been grading during my supposed spring break. And we do have students. I'm always impressed by the thoughtfulness of our students. Some of them start from a place of rather traditional. They don't want to see too many changes. The church that their parents grew up in, they want to keep the best of that going. And then there are some that, as your question intimated, are rather eager for change. My top line reflection on this is about Pope Francis, how prudent and I would even say savvy he has been in the process of managing change in the church. And we can all agree that he's changed very little. 5 years ago, that little change in canon law regarding the inadmissibility of capital punishment, and also some of the disciplinary procedures in one of the chapters of canon law regarding sex abuse claims, a very important protection of children. So these were, though, this tinkering. He has resisted wholesale changes, certainly not doctrinal changes. So when you start talking about the women deacons, thank you, Massimo and George, for bringing that up. I think back to how he managed the synod on the Amazon. It produced Carita Amazonia, that apostolic exhortation after that synod on that region of South America, in which he turned away. He really just he did not engage the proposals of having the viri probati, these proven deacons who might be married, so non-celibate, having them be ordained as presbyters, as priests. So he sidestepped that, and I suspect it wasn't for any real doctrinal reasons, but for practical political reasons. He has to pick his fights. Which battle are you going to, which hill are you going to die on in this battle? And he didn't see that as the moment when he was willing to alienate I don't know, 40% of the Catholics in the world who would have been thoroughly turned off by such a move that would have been criticized as radical. And you could say the same thing, and I think Massimo was hinting at it a minute ago, about the German church. Maybe he would like to approve of the proposal for female deacons, but he doesn't feel it's prudent at this time. So my takeaway is these are case studies or illustrations of how savvy Pope Francis is. Again, I agree with Massimo. He is a centrist, a Vatican II. He was ordained in 1969, so he inherited that. That's the air he breathes. He's not eager to overturn things willy-nilly, but at the same time, I think he's holding back because he, on some changes that he would like to see, could approve of, because of the fear of alienating the more traditionalist side. So the liturgy wars is a great example. So I think he's very savvy, and I think we may be surprised what he does in some, the next few months or years, but we're not going to see throwing caution to the wind.
Okay, let me give a wrap-up question and ask each of you to comment, which is, what's the future of Catholic universities and Fordham as a Catholic university? Is there anything beyond the vestigial invocation of heritage, like our tagline, New York City's Jesuit University, or the motto, in service to others? What can we do to preserve that tradition and the identity and tradition in a meaningful way?
I'll take a first attempt at that, if I may.
Sure.
I remember when Father McShane became president of Fordham University, the motto had been Fordham, New York's Jesuit University. And it was very important to Father McShane that it would be called Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York.
Right.
Now, in retrospect, someone might say, well, that was just a change in words. There wasn't really a substantial difference. And I do think, George, you're touching upon something really important here. Rearranging the lawn chairs, changing the words, or peppering administrative pronouncements with Latin phrases just will not do it. It's a very difficult task to really invigorate the mission and identity of a Catholic university, one in the Jesuit tradition. At this stage, I think people have not wanted to take the risk of really giving up certain kinds of investments in order to make the radical change that's needed. But indeed, it is needed. And I think that we're in a position that's even more fraught than we've seen in the past. Let me just make an analogy with what Professor Faggioli said about Francis's centrism. Francis must know from the 1990s that there's a real danger involved in trying to speak on behalf of the church and have one's message taken in a direction that goes well beyond what it really should be taken. So look at what happened with Benedict and John Paul II, and how the message was really taken well beyond what JP2 or Benedict wanted to say about capitalism, for example. Francis wants to be a centrist, wants to hold things together and not have the message taken out of context and appropriated. It's even more dangerous now than it was 20, 30 years ago. Why? Because the internet allows this feedback loop to allow things, the time frame has been accelerated. So one step becomes a giant step through the machinery of the internet and the meme machine. So just as the Vatican
what can we do?
So just as the Vatican needs to be careful, universities need to be careful. I think the right way to go is take intermediate steps, because you have to build trust. So synodality is a nice intermediate step. Within a university context, I think university presidents should take steps that are not threatening, but that are not too traditional either. So not book clubs may not do that, because you only bring in the people who are already committed. That may not work anymore. I don't know what the answer is. I do think we need to break a few eggs, though, to put it bluntly, in order to get the motion that's needed. And I think people do need to be willing to give up. But if there's no trust, if there's no baby steps that generate trust, I don't think the conversation is going to happen productively.
Father Massaro, what do you think we can do to make the conversation more vital?
Okay, I'll frame it in 2 words, and I'm actually very eager to hear Massimo Faggioli's comments from an Augustinian university not so far away, but also a Catholic university, and how it's different. So my 2 words are hospitality and desire. And the hospitality piece is simply this, to remind you that the Society of Jesus has a wonderful tradition. It's what attracted me to become a Jesuit almost 40 years ago, that we're not closed off from the world, not that any religious order is, even the monastic ones. The Benedictines have a tradition of hospitality that's quite literal, but in the Jesuit figurative sense of hospitality, we want our sponsored institutions, all of our apostolates, from retreat houses and parishes to social service agencies, and especially university campuses. We want them to be places where others can feel at home. So extending hospitality, that's more than just tolerance, that's real deep intellectual solidarity. I'm delighted to have in my department, it's a Department of Theology with close to 30 members, to have a very wide range of religious traditions represented there, opinions, everything from traditional Catholics to secularists and people of other faith traditions. And I'm so delighted to have a good number, the number's increasing, I think, of Muslim students on our campus, Protestant students, I have a couple of Jewish students this semester. I just love to see the interchange. So to be a place that's hospitable to faculty, staff, and students from other traditions is a sine qua non. We wouldn't be ourselves. However, the second half of hospitality is when those other groups who don't identify as Catholics come to our campuses or study here or teach here, I think they really want us to be ourselves. I mean, those of us who wear a collar or who identify as Roman Catholics, that there's a critical mass of Catholic identity. So I don't want to lose that. I don't think there's much danger of losing that in the short run. So it's that tension between hospitality and still a sense of identity. And my final word is desire. I'm optimistic about Fordham's future, and really the future of all the 230 some Catholic colleges in this country. There's a desire for what we offer. And I'm not going to use the word market. Michael Baur would jump out of his chair, but there is a real deep yearning for the kind of dialogue that we foster, that we stage here at Fordham. We allow it to unfold here with a sense of academic freedom. And as long as that desire is there, again, parents who send their kids here and pay the bills, and in faculty members who apply for our jobs, every job search here has dozens or hundreds of candidates. I see that as a sign of great vitality for the future, and promise that our mission will continue. I'm very convinced of it.
So Massimo Faggioli, at his inauguration, Biden referenced St. Augustine, since you're at an Augustinian university. And he said, a saint of my church, Augustine, wrote that a people is a multitude defined by the common objects of their love: opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and the truth. Can we keep those things alive and make them concrete and meaningful through somehow taking advantage of this moment, this synodality call by Francis?
I think we can. It is very loud outside. I'm sorry. So I believe this is an opportunity in American history because of Joe Biden's presidency, because of Pope Francis, and so we are in time of crisis. So, but there's one requirement, there's one condition to take this opportunity, which means that our ethos of dialogue must be matched with an equal ethos of commitment. I mean, experts in interest dialogue know that there's no real dialogue without your commitment to your own tradition, to your own self. And honestly, I believe that the strategic thing to do for universities, for our institutions generally is to invest in a sense of ownership of the mission in the administrators first, even more than faculty probably, because not everything can be given to campus ministry, to theologians, to those who have written in front, I'm the mission person. That is suicidal for a community, for an institution. So I believe that Pope Francis has given us a great opportunity, and his pontificate should not be used in the same way Cold War liberals use John Paul II. He's our friend because he's an enemy of our enemies. This is the wrong way to use this time.
Well, thank you. Let me just say in conclusion that I think that the mission that we've talked about does have vitality at Fordham Law School. And I see that students volunteer at the Feerick Center. I see that there's tremendous interest among students and faculty in problems of racial justice that is the heritage of the movement that quite spontaneously emerged from the murder of George Floyd on the streets of Minneapolis. And I hope that we can find a way to connect that to the deep intellectual tradition of social justice in the Catholic Church. So let me just say on behalf of everyone who has been listening and all who've participated, thank you very much on behalf of the Institute, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Andy Marias, the director, and Russ Pierce, the faculty mentor. So thank you very much for a rewarding afternoon, and I hope that we'll find more opportunities in the near future.